mic back there?
I got a sip of water.
Thanks for joining us. So I set that up. I know we're going to go in a lot of different directions, I think, today. But as a starting point, I think a lot of people are concerned about kind of what are the impacts of what's going on right now. What does it mean for the startup space and for space startups in specific to be looking at what could potentially become a global recession? I guess you can also refute the premise, but do you want to maybe start us off, Francois?
Yes, and maybe as Starburst, right? We have a little bit different perspective. First of all, because we are very early stage, right? And so we look at more the startup creation, even though we follow up with our portfolio on the late stage side. And then we are global, which means that we are not only in the US, but we have a strong presence in Europe, Israel, and Asia. And so what we see is different, even though, yes, the late stage unicorns, the SPAC, maybe telling a different story, we still see a lot of early stage, a lot of startup being created, a lot of very seed competitive rounds, right? Where at least in LA, VC are, not competing, but they are present. They want to invest. They want to build the next space unicorns.
There's still FOMO in the investor community. There's still people wanting to get in on deals.
I mean, we are still seeing new ideas, right? So of course, we are not talking about launchers or generic constellation, but there's still new ideas. We look a lot at the ex SpaceX employees, the spin-off of the big now whether it's SpaceX, Rocket Lab, ABL, now others, right? And there's a lot of founders with new ideas.
Yeah. And Tess, would you say you're seeing sort of the same thing, or?
Well, there has been many changes between last year and this year in space.
Right.
But from a macro market perspective, there's been a shift in the markets. But I would argue they haven't affected the space industry as much as they have broader technology. And why is that? Well, in space, we're actually launching cheaper. We're launching less per kilogram quicker, which is actually helping our clients and customers that need their assets into space for offering at a more affordable price. Now, when it comes to space startups, or I'm going to zoom out here, startups in general, the ones that we're planning on going public, let's say this year, it's being pushed out and they're being affected immediately with the market correction. Rather than IPOing this year, they're having to wait, and their valuations are immediately being affected. However, earlier in the supply chain, perhaps where Francois at Starburst is sitting early, it's going to take a bit of time for it to trickle all the way through the funding ecosystem.
Right.
So I'm talking about pre-IPO rounds. Those are being affected. But it's going to take time, maybe even years, if the market continues in the way that it is, to affect the seed rounds that are still at the last year's frothiness price.
Oh, so the exuberance is not going to pass down to the early stage?
With time.
Right.
Not yet. And then what we are seeing is that, for example, the European Space Agency, right, they increased their budget by 20% for the next 2 or 3 years. We've seen that the Space Force acquisition arm is going to emphasize even more on emerging technologies and startups, right? So on the demand side, at the government and agency level, we still see something that is increasing. So at early stage, we still think that there's space for and opportunities for more startups and more technologies.
Now, I'm curious about, because the defense argument as a hedge seems like an obvious one, right? Like, of course, like it's more resilient because you always have this customer, and this customer is not going to be as affected as other customers by the economic headwinds. But on the flip side, does it sort of change the nature of where you sit in the funnel, of how you work with these companies to know that, like, perhaps for the foreseeable future, these are the customers you're going to be going after versus maybe other private customers?
I love when my portfolio companies, specifically in aerospace, have a good, healthy blend of gov and commercial.
Right.
Why is that? Well, commercial, once you find your go-to-market strategy, you know how much to push the throttle, spend in sales and marketing to get your result, top-line revenue. Government, You're a little lumpier and unpredictable. Yes, I'm looking at you, Brian. However, massive potential contracts. Hey, shout out to TechCrunch Disrupt earlier this year. I was chatting with Pete from the NRO, who I'm going to get the exact number. Pete in the back may be able to help me. Awarded the largest imagery contract to date this year.
Right.
Especially at a time like now, with markets down and maybe commercial needing to push a little more throttle, spend a little bit more to get your top line, a type of contract like that, that's why the diversity of customer base is so important. Mm-hmm. And zooming out, there's another element of this of last year. Investors in boardrooms were pounding our fists on the table saying, growth at all cost. Who cares about efficiency? Just grow your top line. Right. This year, the theme is efficient growth.
Yes, yeah.
Which is where the government's extra helpful for space companies right now when the commercial side isn't as efficient.
Right, so it's kind of like you can move those sliders as needed, but it's not changing the fundamental DNA of the companies necessarily? What do you have?
No, it's just to come back on what Tess was saying. Because of the race between the American government, the Chinese, used to be the Russian, but mostly in the fight between the US and China, government funding will still going to stay at a high level for at least the next 10 years.
Right.
That's not a given. Who knows? Maybe China could settle down, but that's not what we see. And so that race, that pace is going to stay. Mm-hmm. As an investor, early stage, we want to make sure that the startup we are investing are going to be able to both take these governments, agencies, opportunity and contract, right, as well as more commercial. We know in the past, at least on the upstream, right? So it's more hardware related with the launch satellites and everything. It's more financed by the government. Downstream is more commercial, mm-hmm. right? But we want these startups and this technology to be dual use.
Right.
And that's what we're looking for.
Right, and we do have another discussion on dual use to end the day too, so stay tuned for that. But I think I have a question generally about kind of the tensions that then arise. You talk about being an international investor, right? So your portfolio is all over the place, but that's obviously at tension with some of the defense contracts that come up, right? Because you can't necessarily be a truly international company and then also serve U.S. defense interests.
Yeah, what we've seen is, Starburst is a large organization, right? We have 6 different offices, 80 people. Right now, 2 funds that are operating, one in Los Angeles, one in Paris, and we are building more. But yes, we are building geographical funds, right? The US fund is mostly to invest into US startups, and US globally is looking for superiority, right? Europe, they are 5 to 10 years behind, and they are more looking for sovereignty, right? They want some kind of independence. And what we've seen recently, whether it's the Gulf region or Asia without China, they are looking for some kind of independence, right? Now that constellation or the cost of launch, right, are coming down, constellation are coming down. They want their own constellation, whether it's observation, whether it's communication. They want their own. Yeah. Right. So for sure, there's opportunities, not just in the US. I would say, even though US is a front of all the others, and in the US we are investing right now in things that are different than in Europe or in Asia. But I would say US is probably 50% of the market, right? So there's another 50% for Europeans and other region startups to grab, looking and monitoring at what the US is doing.
And it sounds like the goals are not necessarily in conflict, like they can be in parallel because of the different targets, like superiority in one case, sovereignty in the other, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So any thoughts on that, on that conflict, or when you're talking to companies that serve that customer or want to serve that? I know Rocket Lab obviously spun up like defense arm, but yeah. Yeah,
the Bessemer's 2 space portfolio companies that I had the honor of working with, Rocket Lab, Inspire Global, are Rocket Lab is based in New Zealand. We've launched over 30 times down there in Auckland. We're actually launching our first US launch in Wallops. I'm off to Virginia the day after tomorrow to watch that one, which I am thrilled about. And I actually was in New Zealand 2 days ago. 3 days ago? Jet lag. to hang out with Pete. We're based in New Zealand, but we're a Delaware C Corp,
Right.
as well as Spire Global. We manufacture our satellites in Glasgow. We're headquartered in Luxembourg. But why is that? It's because the US Air Force and NASA and NOAA in Spire's case, and DARPA in Rocket Lab's case, are such important customers
Right,
of
yeah.
ours. So we're very, very top of mind of remaining ITAR compliant.
So just to kind of change tacks a bit, but I guess somewhat related. But Tess, we were talking earlier about some of the kind of like changes last year to this, but also just in the general market sentiment, right? And from my perspective, like, organizing the content that goes on TechCrunch, we've seen some sort of like lumpy interest, let's say, in the coverage areas, right? And we've seen, I would say we've seen less interest in the space stuff than we have in some of like, let's say last year prior. And it might be on us in the way we're presenting it, but I would wonder if it's like also partly, is the hype cycle kind of going down? Do you see that? Do you think there's any validity to that, or do you think we're just paying attention to the wrong places, which is also totally possible?
Where are we in the space hype cycle?
Yeah.
And there are some large differences between last year and this year. And I would argue that what is the next technical catalyst or momentum driver in the space industry? I am very uninterested in V300 fantasy rocket or V30 comms constellation. And hey, I completely understand Moore's law is continuing. So a comms satellite or an EO satellite today can replace 20 from 5 years ago. But what's the next thing?
Right.
As not just the investor, but the aerospace engineer in me, I am thrilled and excited for these new potential manufacturing in space, mining asteroids, pharmaceutical testing, lunar whatnot. But then I got to think of timing. Is now the right time? Is the TRL, is the technology ready yet? Where are we? And I think what we could do to continue pushing space as hot and exciting as it is new tech. Now, one thing to throw back to you,
Yes.
which I got permission ahead of time to throw it back to you. Another very large difference between last year and this year is second half of last year, we had more than a dozen billionaires take selfies in space.
That's right.
And this year we had none.
Yeah.
And hey, space tourism only accounts for 1 billion of an overall $350 billion global space economy market. And it's very important to note, while that 1 billion got a lot of media attention
Yep.
from TechCrunch last year, the remaining 349 we use in our everyday lives, whether that's to navigate us to our destination via GPS, whether that's to watch television via direct TV, listen to the radio, Sirius Radio. Maybe in a month, when this goes up on YouTube in 30 days, it's streaming our internet from a satellite. So the 349 billion is very important. But this 1 billion, space tourism, it stopped this year.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, so I don't know for sure. I know that the reaction to a lot of those articles we wrote from, the reader feedback I saw was like, we don't care about seeing these people go to space. We're very angry about seeing these people go to space. They have every advantage already. Like, I don't want to, I'm not excited to see them go up there and be like, you know what, it was great up there because I'm rich. And did you need another reminder that I'm rich, right? So I think that maybe is why the activity has slowed a little bit. But I think you raise a valid criticism was that we cover that because it attracts an audience,
Of course.
right? But like, it also it does a disservice long term, and it also perhaps preferences that over the things you're talking about, right? Which are likely more interesting, but also more difficult to unearth and kind of find, right? So I guess what's the solution to that? Like, how do you work at getting these companies that are maybe working on things that are less flashy than a cowboy hat billionaire in space or whatever? Like, how do you get them out there and get them talking about their story?
Well, taking the billionaire in space selfie a step further, and then Francois will provide, I promise. I think it's just marketed. There could be a tweak. People in space, I believe we need to be a multi-planet species in order to survive, and that's these billionaires go into space and eventually everybody else as well. But it's not to give up on Earth. It's because the technology needed to get to and sustain life elsewhere will ultimately fix the problems we face here.
Right.
MRI and CT scanning technology was developed from the Apollo mission. When we landed on the moon, we wanted to take selfies on the lunar surface. That optic technology is the fundamental invention saving lives in hospitals every day. Laser eye surgery, water purification systems, implantable heart modules. The list is endless of technology that was developed from sending people up there. And Blue and Virgin and SpaceX are continuing that, and there are going to be many more very important life-saving Earth technologies added to the list from people going and sustaining life up there. So I think it's just adding that spin to the coverage.
Yeah, and François, we were talking earlier about some of the biomanufacturing stuff that you can do up there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see these billionaires going to space, but one of the reasons that the people are angry is that there's a lack of purpose, right?
Yeah.
How does preserving the species or Earth is related to having the Jeff Bezos with his cowboy hat at 100 kilometers? Doesn't match, right? And as Tess was saying, right, I don't want to see another rocket startup in the US, right? But in Europe, it's a little bit different. In Europe, it's only starting, or it started a couple of years ago. So yes, there's 3 rockets in Germany, well funded. There's 5 in France, a few in UK, a little bit in Italy and Spain, and they deserve funded, and hopefully they will succeed. What we are looking now in the US, once there's already a lot of rockets startup funded. We've seen a lot of tug, space tug being funded. A lot of constellations. Now our focus is really on what are we going to do in space. As NASA is more focusing on the moon, right, leaving the low Earth orbits to the more commercial industry. What are we going to do? What are we going to be able to manufacture that's going to make sense, either by not producing more CO2 on Earth and putting, for example, these computing farm out of the Earth to space, for example. But also, what are we going to manufacture in space that's going to make sense? And interestingly enough, at the beginning of this year, we launched a dedicated accelerator program called Care in Space, or Health Tech in Space, which is what are the next generation of biotech, health tech that's could be developed, or not just researched, but developed and manufactured in low Earth orbit, right, where gravitation is not zero, but it's compensated, and so at the end you are in microgravity. And so that's really what's exciting us. We have the Axiom, the Orbital Reef, and others, these big guys. But then you have the Outpost, the Varda, that are going to start by doing reusable payload, so it's much less expensive to send an experiment and then bring it back, right? So what are the molecules that's all of the plants that grow faster in space, right? To develop this molecule and faster and to use them back, to treat breast cancer or other things. That's what we really are looking for, and that's what we are excited about. And then you can ask the question, is it the right timing, right? So, 5 or 7 years ago, there was everybody was bullish on mining asteroids. Right? It was too early. It's probably still a little bit too early to think of asteroid minings, but we think that whether it's now or in 2 or 3 years, manufacturing in space is the right time to invest, right? Because in 5 to 7 years, there are going to be more private space stations, we hope, or it's going to be more mature on what we can do and how we can develop that ecosystem.
Right. Yeah, I think like that. Oh, I'm sorry for my feedback that I just generated. I think the thought there is like, is it actually in those? Because the timelines is always the question, right? Especially when you're coming at it from the startup investment perspective, because you're like, it's got to make sense in the 10-year period or whatever, right? So. But we have all that activity around the commercial orbital space stations. We have kind of a deadline, although they keep extending it, on the ISS, right? And so, is it then the time? Can we credulously look at that and say, like, we are going to have some orbital science parks or space platforms in operation within like things that the timelines that make it feasible for VC to play in that space?
So that's what we are betting on now, right? We'll see. Time will tell, right?
I'm going to tell the audience a secret. I know, it's dangerous when I start that way. When I get a pitch deck, specifically for deep tech, hard tech, space tech companies, the timeline that an entrepreneur presents, I want nothing more than for her or him to hit that. Absolutely. But I multiply that by 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And I multiply the capital you think it's going to take by 2 or 3. Why that's important is because, to your point, I've got, a little less than 10 years to return capital to my limited partners, and it's my capital that you're going to be spending to achieve it. Now, hey, this is a piece of so many more important things. You, the problem you're solving, the solution you're coming up with, the customers that are going to pay for it. But that last one, I think when the timing is right, at least for me, is when you're going to hit that revenue inflection point that year, maybe the next year, taking into account and multiplying that by 2 in my head.
Right. So you have the advantage of then being able to wait until it's at that point, right?
Bessemer Venture Partners has about a $5 billion fund.
Yes.
So we have a very large pool of capital. That being said, we invested in Rocket Lab pre-launch. But I have a fun Spire Global story that I can share. Peter Platzer in 2014 had the idea to build the largest general purpose CubeSat constellation. And at the time, it was just AIS sensors for maritime tracking. Him along with hundreds of other entrepreneurs that had this goal, had this vision. So we told Peter, along with everybody else, well, great, go and do it and then come back to us. The next year, he had 2 birds in space, and we led a Series B.
Yeah. Well, inspiring, I guess, hopefully, for people.
Inspiring.
I didn't intend that. I guess we only have a few minutes left, but I am curious on, from both of you, and maybe this is going to get back into answers you already gave, but like, where would you like to see companies focusing their efforts now if they want to have the greatest impact, kind of like going through whatever happens in terms of a recession and then coming out of it? Is it biotech? Is it manufacturing and space? What do you think is that has the most potential for people to play in right now?
If I knew, I would be working on it. I am very happy as an investor partnering.
This is a variation on an answer that you always give, because I always ask some variation of this question.
Do I always give you the same answer? However, since I don't have a magical problem that needs to be solved and a brilliant solution that I'm uniquely situated to solve, a business hygiene fundamental is, in a time like now, it really is about efficiency. It's about really watching your burn and top line and fundamentals of making it through and making it through stronger in the end. But it really is about...
So less about where to focus and about how to focus your business right now, right?
Thank you for saying that better than I did.
Francois?
Yeah, and on our side, yes, how to make more sense, of space, right? We've seen a lot of application where, we are looking at Earth and, sending back information. But yeah, again, what can we manufacture in space that make more sense for Earth? And then we are still looking at, new technology or people that are going to think a little bit differently and improve a current problem by a ratio of 10x, right? And so how can a new type of optics, instead of being mounted on a 2 or 3 ton satellites, can be mounted on 100 kilos and with a 15 centimeter resolution?
Right.
How can we build a digital twin of Earth with an accuracy of 10 centimeters? That type of things on GPS 2.0. And then, yeah, what we want to see entrepreneur with more tractions, able to go fast. That's such a key element, right? Because we are betting in them for 5 to 7 years. We still want them to go fast. From 1 year to another, from 6 months to another 6 months. We want to see the ability to execute, right, and to achieve. Whether it's small things or big things, right? They need to show those tractions, not just papers.
Darrell, I'm curious back. What do you wish you could cover more as a managing editor at TechCrunch? And what are the things you're like, I'm done covering that one?
I'm done covering Elon Musk. But unfortunately, we have to continue covering him forever, for all time. What would I want to cover more of? I mean, I don't know. I just love I love the potential of low Earth orbit economy. I think that's super fascinating, and I'm very excited to continue covering that. But that's it. You gave me the last answer, but we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining us. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.